So we violated fire code, so that's a really good start. And apparently we're opening for a Catholic meeting that's going to occur after this. That's pretty cool. So I was trying to think of how I could make this speech entertaining, but I don't know how to rap. Seriously, serious note, I hope you peed, because I can talk a lot. So as Frank said, I've spoken and written quite a bit about the subject at hand, gender studies, specifically transgender studies. However, I have never spoken about my experiences, so today will be a bit new for me. So please bear with me for a speech that should have been entitled Zooey's Terrible, Long-Winded Existential Analysis of Herself. If you ask my mother, who's sitting right over there, I'm sure she will let you know that any time I speak, it becomes gratuitously academic and convoluted, so there should be something for everyone in this performance. So the actual title of this speech is Heteronormative Privilege and the Construction of LGBT Identity. Now, besides being a lot of big words that sounded good jammed together, this title and the content of the speech actually have a very specific and important meaning. That being that LGBTQI identity cannot be explained or understood separately from heteronormative privilege, and thus to understand LGBT identity, we must also look at hetero privilege. The tricky thing about this, however, is that hetero privilege is invisible, it's unseen. And that's not to say it doesn't exist, it does, and very clearly, as I will show you in dozens of examples. The speech is very long. But it is taken for granted, it is misunderstood, it is looked at only in terms of exception when it is the rule itself, and thus it is left for the most part to function undisturbed. If you watch any slew of films about how to achieve the perfect crime, on countless occasions the answer will be that once the crime is committed, to simply hide in plain sight, as no one would ever think to look for you there. Right? This is the plot of the Denzel Washington film, The Inside Man. A bank robber pulls off the perfect heist by doing what? Hiding where in all of these places? In the bank. Spoiler alert, I'm sorry. I'm sure you've seen it already. If not, it's wonderfully acted, so you can watch it just for that point. So this is the difficult dilemma of fighting heteronormativity. The problem is everywhere and nowhere at once, as it is who we are. So we must take our systems of thinking and being, our culture, if you will, as the problem itself. And here we are all implicated in the crime, which of course makes it difficult to confront. However, if we are to have any concern for LGBTQI autonomy and freedom, we will need to highlight heteronormative privilege in our culture, and we will have to challenge ourselves to do something about it. At this point, I'd like to quote a Facebook post I delivered on my political news site, and that's at rupture.usa if you're interested. This is being filmed, and I have the high hopes that those words can be flashed across the screen as if this is an infomercial. I stated, "You never hear of gay parents disowning their children for being heterosexuals. You don't hear of lesbian bosses firing workers for being straight, and you certainly never hear of intersex doctors mutilating infants for having clear or distinguishable gender parts." Now this post went over incredibly well with quite a few shares, likes, etc. But despite all the concern and favor, I'm certainly not the first to broach these issues, and these are common practices in America. 40% of homeless youth are LGBT. 1 in 5 transgender people like me, are homeless or on the verge of becoming homeless. And 1 in 2,000 people are born with indistinguishable gender parts. That's the same number as those born with red hair. We all know you have seen someone with red hair before. It was very clear that these knowledges are not truths, but only representations of reality. And if you ever take a class with me, on the first day I will ask you the specious question of, what's the difference between a fact and opinion? And let's see how shy we are. Can one of my students please answer?
A fact is followed by the majority. fact is your representation.
A fact is a representation, and that representation is what is most widely accepted by the community. So the fact is simply an opinion that most people agree upon. The problem is those facts, or what I'm referring to as knowledges, are not taken as opinions. They're taken as truths, which are agreed upon, internalized, and thus shape how we view the world. In terms of our accepted knowledge of heterosexuality, it means that we view the world in terms of men who act like men, and they love women, of course, and women who act like women and subordinate themselves to men. This is what Judith Butler refers to as the heterosexual matrix, where what follows is that we reproduce the performances or knowledges of our culture to the point where they simply seem natural. Put simply, you watch enough romantic comedies, you see enough boys wearing blue and playing with trucks, or girls draped in pink, or Kim Kardashians with blood injected from their legs into their faces, or whatever the hell it is. And as you unconsciously repeat these behaviors as well, you apply makeup, you watch football, you start to believe they are natural or truth. These knowledges, of course, produce a number of practices, both institutional and interpersonal, which discriminate and oppress those who don't fit into them. Despite persistent in-group bickering and questioning, this is where lesbians, bisexuals, transgenders, queer, intersex individuals, and gays all do share a common identity, as we do not fit into these knowledges, and thus share a common bond of oppression and exclusion from them. Now, despite that common bond, we are all very different and do face specific challenges, have different goals and beliefs, and struggle for different autonomies. Thus, I would like to make it perfectly clear that I do not speak for all LGBT people, and as a transgender woman, I do not even wish to represent all transgender peoples. However, it is a persistent finding in sociology that this is the burden of the minority member, that he or she or those not fairly represented in language by our culture must indeed speak for the entire minority. Here is a perfect example of heteroprivilege, autonomy, and anonymity. No one will ever ask you to speak on behalf of all heterosexuals. You get to speak as Mark, or Robin, or John, or whoever the hell you are. Never with the burden of potentially damning or bringing to salvation everyone like you in a mere statement of your opinion. For example, no one says, look at those stupid heterosexuals on the Jersey Shore. Although they are heterosexuals, they have the privilege of being stupid just as themselves. I think my mic is dying. I'm going to be loud. I would like to speak specifically on my transitioning, as I believe it brings helpful illustrations to our point at hand. A student recently told me they spoke to a former student of mine, and he said to her, "Oh yes, I've had Pook as a teacher, but he wasn't Zooey then." How very interesting a remark, and one in which affords me the opportunity to critique the language of transitioning as a concept as well. Of course, in the heterosexual world we live in, if one is born as a biological male, it means a whole number of things, including that they, like women, they ought to act strong, make money, etc. Of course, nowhere in our understanding of what a biological male ought to be is the fact that they may be a woman. Thus, of course, transitioning itself seems contrived and artificial and a choice, or as they like to put it, a lifestyle. However, nothing could be further from the truth, and here I'm taking it back. This is my truth. I may dress differently or make alterations to my body, but I was and always am transgender. And here I find the word transition itself to be a nuisance and incapable of describing my reality. My mother likes to tell me when she uses the wrong gender pronoun that she's sorry and it takes time to get used to. What she and others don't consider is what it's like to hear that wrong pronoun for 27 years and to be made to fit in within a set of values, beliefs, and behaviors that you cannot fit into. So this is another example of privilege. It must be very nice to have your identity be the true identity, and to not be looked at as a suspect when you affirm who you are, to not be the other. Furthermore, it must be very nice to have no fear that when people look at you, they will speak to you in the way you wish to be spoken to. To not spend an hour applying makeup only to be called the wrong gender pronoun simply because of accepted cultural norms which do not include truths and identities which are different but yet equally real and true. Here the unforgettable line of Sartre's "no exit, hell is other people" is not some dystopic nightmare, but a harsh and cruel reality LGBTQI people face on a daily basis. Sadly, this process of disciplining is not free of its place among the LGBT community. For instance, a few months ago, I was made to feel illegitimate or inauthentic by another transgender girl for not following what was considered the institutional protocol for transitioning. She said to me, "When a girl has gender identity disorder, this is what they do." And I was deeply saddened to hear that someone like me would accept they had a mental disorder simply because they do not fit society's norms or arbitrary gender etiquette of how one ought to act. I even questioned myself and found a deep loss to not only be rejected by my culture, but to not be accepted by members of the one identity I longed for. Incidentally, in 1 month, because of support from people all over the country, gender identity disorder will be removed as a mental disorder from the DSM-5. The appropriate question now for this girl would be, who are you? Luckily, a few months before that, I met another transgender girl named Peyton, who with profound care and compassion, and yet without even a second thought, looked at me and told me, "Regardless of whatever choice you make with your body, Zoe, you are transgender, and I accept you for who you are." And consciously or unconsciously, I think I'm very aware that she saved my life. Sadly, I've also faced persecution from the gay community. My last partner's best friend is an esteemed medical doctor in the state, and he made numerous attempts to dissuade her from being with me. He told her, and I'll put this in friendly terms, we have a child in the room, that one day she would come home and find me with a man, and that I was simply a coward for being transgender, and what people like me are is really gay, and I was simply hiding it and scared to admit it. Here again, the panopticon of heterosexual practices is internalized and then reproduced. And what is simply not acceptable is someone using their body in non-normative practices. And in nothing more than the common homophobic thinking of a high school bully, someone viewed as a male acting like a female must be a closeted homo. And keep in mind, this is a highly educated person and a gay man. So when I use the term knowledge, it is clear that these are accepted truths among everyone. Even people in the LGBT community are not separate from these knowledges. We must find a place within and resist, but we are still within this specter of culture. This is not some radical off-the-wall opinion, as this doctor's opinion clearly shows us. And we are all subject to and defined by them. In this way, a boogeyman like the Ku Klux Klan would be far more preferable, and that at least we could have a visible enemy to lash out on. Again, instead, it is part of each of us and our collective consciousness we must fight. I want to share one final story here. My friend wasn't doing so hot, and he eventually comes to find out he's got an organ failing him. In fear and panic, as he was seriously sick, he explained to the doctor he was gay, which is, of course, part of the questionnaires and such that we all fill out. The doctor responded that his organ must be failing because he has AIDS. Of course, we know all gay people have AIDS, right? Imagine that, your body is failing you, you're scared, you're panicking, and you're told you have AIDS. My friend didn't have AIDS, and he was just all right after he got an organ transplant. But think of what that must feel like, to be told arbitrarily and without concern that because you're gay and sick, it means you have AIDS. Now there is the view in the West that science is objective, it's free of cultural bias, and when one puts on their magical white lab coat, all of their cultural knowledges and beliefs just drifts away to a land of infinite unicorns. I asked you to consider that both being gay and being transgender were mental disorders not too long ago, and now they are not. Now, did the facts change over that time? Of course not. Our cultural attitudes did, thank God. We are becoming more tolerant, at least in some ways. But we still have a long way to go, and of course, questioning and vigilantly digging into those accepted knowledges will determine our identities is necessary for LGBT equality. We must accept that one truth does not fit all, and give LGBT peoples, as well as peoples of the world, the right to define their own identities and circumstances. This is a privilege that heterosexual people alone have enjoyed for far too long. So, in a lot of ways, I know what I have just proposed to you must seem daunting. If today is the first day that you're learning that knowledge is a societal construction with specific aims, goals, and purposes, which benefits some at the expense of others, and from which we constitute our realities, and are thus all guilty in the process, you're probably going to have a difficult time sleeping tonight. Now, while all of these Foucauldian conceptions of power and knowledge are all true, and our understandings of the world do very much come from a social process, not unlike a panopticon of a prison in which we are all inmates, and we internalize the fear of the guard always watching us, it doesn't mean that we are helpless. There's a lot we can do, and I'm going to offer you as many suggestions as I can think of in this moment. So it's going to be like rapid fire here. Again, we need to change the way we think about the world and accept not everyone is the way we are. And this doesn't make their actions a choice. You didn't choose to be a heterosexual, did you? No. So because someone is different than you does not mean they are putting on a front. It means you are a bigot for being unable to believe that your beliefs are not eternal truths. It might be frightful for you to accept, but some men like men. Some women have penises. Some people are neither man nor woman. And for my queer peoples in the audience, some people do what they want and they don't care to be labeled. And newsflash, they don't even care what you think about them. Thus, first, we must change the way we speak. Do not assume genders. The breaking down of the world into terms of sir and ma'am is not respectful. It's presumptuous, scientifically unsound, narrow-minded, and was dated 20 years ago. Let people define how they wish to be addressed. Ask them. Sweden recently adopted a gender-neutral pronoun. We have to follow and end the needless persecution we all faced in being jammed into boxes which strip all of us of our freedom and creativity. This is to say that gender norms don't just hurt transgender people, by the way. Think of the discomfort and illness that has come from a culture who insists on holding women to standards of extreme dieting and plastic surgery, which can all be read in adherence to the standard of magazine covers. These photographs are severely doctored and representative of next to no one. For instance, when I go to get work done to look more like a biological woman, I always get stares from the women in the waiting room. But the real puzzling thing here is that if I came to look like them, that is a woman, who did they come here to look like? They are already women, after all. And here we see that gender is the act of chasing an impossible dream. Yes. Men, of course, as Jackson Katz, who came here last year, put it, are disciplined to be hypermasculine, emotionless, and tough. But as we've seen, the bravado of the Godfather movies in our culture has only led to needless violence, such as our string of public shootings in the last few years evidences. So we seriously need to cut down on the Kim Kardashians and the Taylor Swifts, who stink of artificiality and promote female objectification for the desires of men. We also need to cut down on the rocks of the world who tell us how a real man ought to act. And ironically, he is the star of Disney's The Tooth Fairy. Do I need proof anymore that these men and women are putting on a front? That they are the ones acting? But nonetheless an act that we internalize, we produce, and punish ourselves for not performing correctly. And it's hurting all of us. We need more Lady Gagas, and even Keshas, and Nicki Minaj's, who break and push gender norms, and open up more room for all of our autonomies. We need to support artists like Frank Ocean, who show us that men can be vulnerable. And rappers like Dead Prez and Saul Williams, who refrain from the bitch hoe game, and instead opt for a language of poetic realness. Bands like Shai Hulud, who look honestly at the world and are not afraid to share their sadness and discontentment in the loneliness of a culture that is needlessly arrogant, brutish and selfish. Groups like Propaganda who advocate the true merits of feminism in respect and dignity for all human beings. These are men we can admire as they challenge patriarchy rather than enforce it. By way of sexuality, we need to stop assuming people are straight. Do not ask males if they have girlfriends and females if they have boyfriends. Adopt the gender-neutral term of significant other. And stop calling things gay. How long have we been having this conversation? And seriously, you heterosexual men love the game of football, in which large, obese men in tights roll around with other large, sweaty men chasing balls. Let's be honest, okay? We can frequent LGBT establishments where all are free and welcome, and we are free of degrading gender practices such as Ladies' Night. We need to keep building clubs like the Gay Straight Alliance and opening dialogues like this in our community. So thank you to them. If you are a student here, join. They've got a form that they're going to be passing around. Perhaps it's already around. Wherever they are, please get that form going around. I will pledge my commitment to work with them in the fall as well. If you're a student somewhere else, start a group like this. Start a group like this in your community. The more we talk about the issues, the better opportunity we have for combating them. So let's make these public discourses rather than private ones and change these accepted knowledges of heterosexuality to those of inclusion, autonomy, and acceptance. Begin this conversation with your parents, friends, and loved ones. Finally, if you're of the LGBTQI persuasion, it's time to be proud. I don't care how hokey that sounds, but visibility is a form of discourse, and it's a way to win this battle. Yesterday, I bought a dress for the first time, and I spent so much of my time looking over my shoulder, waiting for someone to say something cruel to me. And when someone finally stared at me and wasn't too kind, I found myself surprised, because I wasn't upset, I was relieved. As a very smart woman I know puts it, you know what happens when someone doesn't like you? Nothing. Be yourselves, all of you. And that means getting rid of these ridiculous norms and challenging these accepted knowledges. Thank you.
I'm Angelina, you Jennifer. Come on, bitch, you see where Brad at? Ice my wrist and I piss on bitches.